Today's lesson in exposure focuses on the concept of luminosity. Keywords and concepts for today's exposure lesson are luminosity, available light, and the concepts that the camera functions similarly to an eye. Also, we need to be mindful how light behaves in order to capture it best, and just because you can see does not mean there's enough light to capture a full exposure. After teaching photography for more than 20 years, I have come to realize the significance of what I call luminosity in exposure. It's not an official term when discussing reciprocity theory or watching YouTube photo tutorials, but I think it's very important and one that's easy to understand. We experience this one. We bring our experiences and understanding to it. This variable affects so much of how we choose to set our cameras and whether we even have enough light to capture an image. It's important to understand how light behaves and how to recognize when we have enough, too much, or not enough. Luminosity. It's how much light there is around you and shining on things and reflecting off when you're photographing that scene. It's the available light. I think we all know that we're able to see things because light reflects off of objects and shines back into our eyes. Cameras and film work the same way. And just like our eyes, we need to make adjustments when that available light changes. Bringing our own experiences and understanding of light helps us as photographers. We've all experienced changes in luminosity, and while our eyes adjust automatically, we need to take light into account when choosing and framing our photographs. Okay, we've all experienced this. For example, you're sitting inside your house, but it's lovely out, so you decide to go outside. You walk out the door and ouch, the bright sun hurts your eyes and your pupils work to adjust to all of that luminosity. It's just so much more light, and your pupils shrink to let only a teeny bit of that light in, so the light doesn't hurt, or in our terms, overexpose our retinas. We cannot change whether a cloud is across the sun or how bright your kitchen light is, but we can choose a time and location or redirect a pose and our camera, or even add a spotlight to maximize the amount of light in our photographs. Looking back at our exposure chart, we look at luminosity differently than the other three variables. Luminosity is unofficial, remember? It doesn't have a series of standard numbers and stops, at least how we discuss it. We consider luminosity based on experience of different lighting conditions, with bright sun being the most light and candlelight and moonlight being the least amount of light. The chart is set up in the same order, with greatest amount of light at the top and least light at the bottom, just like ISO, f-stop, and shutter speed. We don't measure the actual light ourselves, but our light meter does that job for us. The light meter in our camera reads how much light shines into our lens and helps set the other variables for a successful exposure. Here are 4 levels of luminosity that we've experienced compared to one another so that we can understand their relationship to one another. Bright sun on a clear day is obviously the most light, but what surprises people is the outside on a cloudy day is still brighter than an interior room with lights on. It's surprising how little light there is at night, even if it seems bright to us. That's our eyes and our pupils adjusting so that we can see. When we go to take photographs, our cameras, the light meter inside, will read this light for us and help us make the correct settings. To follow the analogy we started last time when discussing ISO of water equaling light, we can look at luminosity in this way. Luminosity can be perceived as the force of light entering our camera. The more available light there is in the space or is seen, the stronger that force. So sunlight enters our camera with the most force, like a fire hose. And by comparison, nighttime light, whether artificial or moonlight, exists as a bit of a drip of light by comparison. While this may seem silly, the analogy of light to water will be really helpful as we move on, putting all of these variables together. Luminosity cannot change much, but like I said, We can choose a time or location or redirect a pose or even a spotlight. We react to it and how and when and what we choose to photograph. When we look at luminosity in our chart, it still follows most of the available light at the top, least available at the bottom. Under normal circumstances, we get good exposures in our cameras at the 400 speed ISO film with this range of bright sun to inside light. Okay, so after all this talk about light, what is it we need to know to use our cameras well? We need to be mindful of how light behaves in the scenes we want to photograph in order to capture the best exposure. And with luminosity, we bring our experience to this understanding of light. Our eyeballs work like cameras and adjust to changing lighting conditions automatically. Understanding how the eye works helps you understand your camera. If we think about luminosity and how bright something is as a force, as how strong that light is entering our camera, that helps us understand exposure. And since our eyes are automatically adjusting, just because we can see does not mean our camera will work in those same settings. When we consider the exposure chart and the luminosity variable within it, bright sun inside with lights on are where our camera works best, based on the film we've put in. One big takeaway should be that there's the most light outside with sun, whether it's sunny, cloudy, or even in the shade. If we go where there's the most light, we have the greatest chance of capturing a correct exposure. So take your pictures outside whenever you can, unless it's nighttime. Next week, we will cover the last two variables of exposure, f-stop and shutter speed, and we will see how all of this comes together.